Hey, 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 and welcome to My Ex Appeal, Your Everything Divorce podcast. My name is Joie Comeiro, and I'm here with Mandy Baker, and we are the friends that you didn't know you needed. If you are listening for the first time, welcome. And if you are listening to us all the time, every day, welcome back, bitch. And we're going to get right to it.
Joey and Mandy, everything divorce related. We can put the S back in your ex appeal. Joey and Mandy, the friends you didn't know you needed on My Ex Appeal, and Everything Divorce Podcast.
All right, My Ex Appeal listeners, we have got a fantastic guest on today. This is the guys edition. We have got Dr. Eran Magen, who earned his MA in education and PhD in psychology from Stanford University. He completed his postdoctoral training in child psychology and population health. He is the founder of parentingforhumans.com and divorcingdads.org, which supports parents in creating a strong, collaborative, and joyful relationship with their children. And Joey, you're going to love this. He is also the founder of Early Alert, which prevents suicide among students and veterans.
Wow.
I know that's close to your heart. So without further ado, we are going to get into this.
Amazing. That's an amazing little bio you have there. Excuse us. That's awesome. That's a lot.
He's going to get off this podcast and be like, who are those knuckleheads that I just talked to?
That was amazing.
Get off this podcast feeling good about myself. No, this is
yeah,
nice.
you should.
You should.
Yeah. Thank you for coming with us here today.
Yes.
My
It's exciting.
great pleasure. Yeah. What's the connection? What's the veteran connection, Joey?
My husband is a veteran and he works with veterans.
Oh, great.
So yeah. Yep. He's a veterans agent in a local town nearby, and he works with veterans every day. So yeah, he's always involved. So let's get into more about you as a person, though. I want to hear. We heard all these accolades.
Me?
Yeah, you as a person, personally. Tell us who you are, please.
Well, I like long walks on the beach. I enjoy. Let's see. I was born in California. Both my parents are Israeli. They were here for a few years. And then when I was about 8 months old, everybody moved back to Israel. So did I, because it's hard to be an 8-month-old in LA without a driver's license. And I grew up in Israel. My parents were divorced when I was 3 or 4, something like that. My dad moved to the US after they divorced, which, I mean, back then was like moving to a lunar colony. You know, communication was hard and it was distant and super expensive. And then where shall I fast forward? Another notable event in my life was I was 12. My sister was 17. She was in a really bad car crash and sustained really bad brain injury as a result, and very slowly rehabilitated, but never regained really full capacity. So that's part of my responsibility right now, caring for her as well. She lives near me. I'm in Connecticut now. And then after that, I got my bachelor's degree. I served in the Israeli military. I was an officer there. And then after finishing my service, moved to New York City. Did social work there. I wanted to do something really different than military. And so I worked with homeless folks in New York City doing homeless outreach for about a year and a half there, while figuring out what I want to do next, and then realizing it's graduate school, and then going into applying to graduate schools, and then going there. So that was in California when I went to graduate school. After that, moved to Pennsylvania. After that, moved to California. After that, moved to Connecticut, where I am today. I have one son who is just turned 7 a little while ago, and will tell anybody who wants to hear. He's very proud of having turned 7, and I am too. I think it's a big accomplishment. His mom and I separated when he was just about a year old. This was back in California, and after that, moved here to Connecticut. And outside of that, I mean, I can tell you sort of trivia about my life, but I don't know what else you would like to know.
I think that's amazing. So you've moved a lot. That's what I got. You've done a lot of things and moved a lot of times.
That's one way to summarize it. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So you have a system when you move.
Sort of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm slowly learning how to do it better. Community is always a challenge, right? Establishing a community is such a big priority in my life, and such an ongoing challenge. And I feel like every time I move, I do it a little bit better, a little bit faster.
That's good, especially now that you have a 7-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's also a community facilitator, right? It's like pets and kids.
Yeah.
Make it easy to make connections.
Exactly.
That's a good point. Facilitator, that's a good point. So, so the first question that we have, because we're geared towards females on this podcast, so this will be a very interesting perspective for our listeners, because although all of our subjects that we've had on the podcast can help anybody, it's been geared towards females in the female perspective, because obviously Mandy and I are each divorced, so people hear our perspective on divorce, but we haven't really had a father's perspective or a male perspective on divorce. So this will be very interesting. But I know that there are some risks that dads face when it comes to divorce. So what are some of these risks? And then the second part of that question is, why are dads at these risks going through a divorce?
I'm glad that you brought me onto a show that's geared primarily toward women. I think it's great, for all of us to understand each other's perspectives. Absolutely. And have conversations. I mean, honestly, the biggest risk to society right now in my mind is the inability to talk across differences. And obviously there are differences. And if we don't talk about them, we just become more and more extreme and siloed and, xenophobic, and nothing good happens as a result. So I'm glad we're talking. I think it's good. And I think the challenges in some ways are very similar. In some ways are really different. It's important to understand each other in order to make the process the best it can be for everybody. So in terms of risks for divorcing dads, so if you're a man, your likelihood of dying by suicide is higher than if you're a woman, just in general in life. Once you begin the process of divorce as a man, your risk of dying by suicide doubles, basically instantly. And it doesn't for women. Divorce does not affect suicide rates for women. And that to me is sort of a starting and ending point that's important to keep in mind. Or that's for me a point that's important to keep in mind, both as a starting point as an ending point. Because even though everybody goes through a lot of grief and stress during a divorce, most people do, I think it's important to keep front of mind that if you're a man, you're so much more likely to get to such an extreme place that you end up taking your own life as a result. This is related to other outcomes that are more likely to happen to men than to women during divorce, and particularly when it comes to custody. Right? I believe the statistic is that out of every 6 cases, in 5 cases, custody goes to the mom. And research on this is not excellent. So it's not clear whether in those other times it's because the dad said, oh, okay, and then just walked away, or because there was dangerousness involved or anything like that, right? But there are many cases that I'm familiar with personally where the fathers desperately want to be in their kids' lives, are, as far as I can tell, essentially competent, safe parents. And yet courts will often side, at least initially, with the moms in this case, for lots of reasons, some of them very good. And I would say that it makes statistical sense to act the way that the system acts, the courts, police, whoever ends up getting sucked into it, right? Statistically, it makes very good sense to instantly, immediately, and unequivocally side with the mom. It's just that it ends up missing a lot of individual cases that don't go according to the average statistic. And we can get more into that later, but it's a huge conundrum. It's like, how do you make the best possible decision at any given moment? Well, if you have no information, you go based on statistics. But if you do that, then you're ignoring a lot of individual cases that are different. Okay, so you were asking about the reason for these risks that the dads face. So I think systemically that's one reason. But I think the other part of it is that men have so much less support than women do in the US. Right? The culture here does not encourage men to have strong, close, supportive relationships in general. And very often, actually, the people that fathers, are closest to in their lives are the people in their family. And before divorce, there's some estrangement that happens and so on. And still, the fathers don't go and start developing other close relationships during this time. They withdraw, they do their own thing. They maybe try focusing more on the kids, maybe focus more on work, whatever they do. Very often what happens is that as a divorce hits, women have well-developed support systems and men have not basically any kind of support. And once the free fall stage starts, they don't even know where to start, nor are men socialized to reach out for support. And that becomes a huge disadvantage, whereas women have stronger support systems and are often more comfortable using them. Men don't and aren't. And that's just such an easy recipe for catastrophe. And combine that with the fact that the system, capital S, the system sides with the woman, or particularly with the mom at the initial stages before like some serious investigation happens, because it's a good because it's statistically sensible to do that, right?
Yeah.
The fathers end up feeling very alienated. They get very discouraging and very unaffirming messages from the system, again, capital S. And they can easily develop very negative self-concepts. They can easily feel very hopeless, and then end up deciding either to remove themselves physically or remove themselves entirely from the world, just believing that they're bad people because of the amount of messages that they get from the system and having no other close relationships to affirm their sense of self during that time.
That makes so much sense, because I find now that you've brought it to the front of my mind, men don't share as much as we share. I mean, women, I know for myself in particular, when I started having problems in my marriage, my girlfriends were the first people I turned to. And I don't think my ex-husband ever talked to anybody. Right. And so then as that builds up, I can totally see how a man who hasn't shared anything with his friends or his community wouldn't want to begin with that, wouldn't want to begin with sharing something so heavy. And so therefore they bottle it up, and then they start the hamster wheel in their own head, which cannot be healthy if you don't have any other outside voices, a counselor, an elder, anybody just talking to you or having a safe place to go to talk through it, instead of just talking to yourself and having that other, the two different egos on either shoulder talking to you and having it be just different versions of yourself. So that makes complete sense to me. I mean, Joey does it to you. It makes sense to me.
Yeah. And honestly, when you were just talking to, there were a couple of things that come to mind. One is we have a mediation company, and we specialize in divorce. And I mean, I don't even know if this is an actual statistic, but the female is always the one who calls us first to start the process. And we've noticed the husband kind of doesn't want to have anything to do with it at first, because they just don't want their life to change. But at the same time, too, when they come in, over the years, we've had to learn to kind of, when it comes to the male, just kind of sit back a little bit and let them talk more, because it almost looks like they're a jerk at first. It looks like they're just being rude. But the more you sit with them, the more you're like, okay, wait a second. He's just processing this a little bit different. She's willing to talk, and she wants to talk it out, and he gets quiet, and you're like, oh, he's just processing this, and he's almost like hiding his feelings a little bit more. And so when you're saying that now, it makes more sense that the suicide rate would be higher, because everything's just bottled up and ready to just boom, explode, I'm assuming. So I think we have to be maybe a little bit gentler to some of the males going through this, because we don't know. We don't know what's going on inside. They're not saying it.
Yeah, they're not saying anything.
You said so many important things, but both of you brought up so many important and interesting points. Like Mandy, when you were saying, when things start going sideways in a marriage, right, and the woman is likely to start talking to friends about this and what's going on, and men are likely to not. That's a huge thing, because then by the time that things go completely off the rails, not just a little bit sideways, now the woman is likely to have, again, we're talking in averages, right? But the woman is likely to have a support system that's informed, that's moving at the same speed, is ready to offer support, maybe already started offering support. And the man often doesn't. And a lot of it has to do with men feeling shame, for example, about relationships not working out, right? Just feeling ashamed to talk about it. And that combines with the shame of talking about feeling lost or feeling like they need support or guidance. Again, it's just men are socialized not to talk about these things by and large. And so even as things are starting to go sideways, there's a big differential in the kind of support and willingness to support that's available. And then again, once they go completely off the rails, a separation starts, a divorce starts, and all of that, they're in totally different starting points in terms of the level of support that's available to them. And to Joey's point, in terms of how much they've even processed what's going on, right? It may be that at any human being, man or woman, at first pass has a big emotional processing of whatever's happening. And then as you iterate through it and you start bringing structure and clarity and you get some feedback and you consider different perspectives, and over time you tell a story that's more kind of reasonable and nuanced and thoughtful and informed. And it may well be, Joey, right, that you get the man in mediation talking about it for the very first time ever, really, and having all these intense emotions and the fear about it and the guilt and the shame and the confusion. And yeah, it's just, you're probably getting a first pass, basically, right? Whereas women may be coming in just having processed it, having discussed it and thought about it and iterated through it.
Yeah.
So true. Yeah. And we have noticed, you know, you can tell the female has already done her research. She's probably already told him a million times that this was going to happen eventually. She's already processed it, and she's on like a faster path than he is. And he's almost like shocked, like, what? I know you said that to me, but I was just going to ignore it, and we're going to live our lives the way we were, miserable, you know. Seems to be the majority, not everybody, but it seems to be the majority of what we see. And so that's such a good point that we're seeing it for they haven't talked to it to anybody. So when they say it in mediation, it's blurted out.
Well, and it's the first time they're hearing it come out of their body. You know, how many times have we said, Joey, you have to, when you hear it come out, the more you practice it, a little bit more, it becomes a little bit more numb. It's a little bit more, I don't want to say, you just become used to hearing your own voice say, I'm going through a divorce. I'm getting divorced. My life is about to change. But when you say it for the first time, and you're sitting in a room with a mediator and your soon to be ex-wife, I can only imagine the rock that's in your stomach or the rock that's in your throat. And you haven't heard yourself say it out loud with your own voice and recognize it out loud. And women also, we're emotional. We go off our emotions in a heartbeat, right? And I can assume that the gentleman in the situation would be more, how's my life going to look financially? How does this affect me with what I'm earning, my income? How much am I going to lose? How much do I get to keep? What am I splitting? And so that has to be in their rails too, especially if they were the primary breadwinner in the situation. And now it's splitting in half. There's a lot. There has to be a lot. The emotion side of it, the stability side of it, the children.
We get
right?
that. We hear that a lot. They're afraid that they're not going to see their kids anymore. That's like the biggest thing that we get for the dads, that they're like, where are my kids going to live? Like, I see my kids every morning, and now am I not going to see my kids every morning?
Yeah, probably the most important thing is to get really clear about the level of involvement that they want with their kids. You know, family court is so reluctant to change a status quo as long as the kids look okay. So if a dad leaves or is pushed out and sort of acquiesces, and that goes on for a few months and then goes to court and says, I want to change it, now it's an uphill battle. Really different than saying from the start, look, I really want to stay involved. I want to see them at this kind of frequency, or, you know, whatever. And even if it doesn't happen, to just register the protests. That's super important. But it all starts with figuring out how much access do you want to the kids. And And that can be really tricky to do in the throes of agony that are in a divorce that maybe you want and maybe you don't want, but it's still super destabilizing and scary for all these reasons. So I think step one is reaching out for support for anybody, right? You need more brains. You need brains that are not in the middle of it. You need people who care about you, thinking about you and holding you and helping you think and feel through this. So the absolute step one, ideally, this is step like -5, right? As things are starting to go sideways. But at any point, it's a good time to start reaching out for support. And you talk to friends, you talk to family, you get a therapist, you call 988, right? Which is free and confidential 24/7, nationwide counseling, not just for people who are in suicidal crisis, but really anybody who needs to talk to anybody. Like just start somewhere. They'll start connecting to resources. Call 211, which will give you your state's information line where there are these amazing folks that can really give you help about anything. You say I don't have enough food, or you say I can't, get rides to medical appointments or whatever. They'll help you. And so you can say I need support groups for this kind of thing or whatever. If there are people you know, talk to people you know. If you don't know people you can talk to people you don't know. But start getting support. That's absolutely the very first thing. And then get clear about how much involvement you want in your kids' lives. At the beginning, I would say focus on frequency. See your kids as often as possible and try to reach some sort of an agreement between the two adults about how this can work best for everybody. Especially when the kids are young, the frequency matters a lot more than the duration, right? If you can see a kid for an hour a day, that's better than seeing them for a whole day once every 2 weeks or something like that. Later it changes. But along with all of that, do the best you can. I'm talking to the imaginary men in the room now, like do the best you can to lower conflict, to lower intensity. The kids can do fine through divorce in general. The biggest risk factor for all kinds of bad life outcomes for them is exposure to parental conflict.
A lot of parents come in and their like number one thing is, they don't get divorced for a very long time because they're so afraid that they're going to screw up their kids. So they'd rather just stay in a toxic home than screw up their kids in their minds. So the fact that you just said kids are fine, they can make it through. They just don't need to see you fight. That's the biggest thing, that's not up to them to know that you're fighting. But so that was good that you just said that. I have a question based off of what you just said, because obviously men have to get more help. I think everybody should be going to therapy. My therapist emailed me this morning because I had to cancel the other day, and been waiting for him to email me back because I feel horrible that I didn't go to therapy the other day. So everybody should go to therapy, but a lot of times, and obviously we're talking about heterosexual relationships right now with a man and a woman, but a lot of times it's the man in the relationship comes to us and they're more confused because they're talking to their guy friends, and their guy friends are like, forget it. You don't need this. We have a friend who didn't pay that much in child support. You shouldn't be paying that. You should be doing, and then they're more confused. So how do they get out of that web at the same time? Is it better to just be like, go to therapy and only confide in a few people? I feel bad for the guys who go through that, where their friends are just telling them all the wrong things and fueling a fire.
I think it's just important to diversify your sources of support. Get informal support, get some professional support, get support from people who've been through it. I think that's really, really important, as opposed to people who are just kind of improvising their way, thinking through it, who are not you.
That's the
but
important
in the end,
part.
You have to make your own decisions.
Like this is actually helpful for us as mediators, by the way.
Yes.
So thank you. I'm taking notes for what we say to clients, because right away we would want to say ignore your friends, but you're right. You can't say that to somebody, because who's to say that they're wrong or they think that they're right. So to say ignore your friends isn't the answer, but to diversify your support system and to focus on, ask them what their key focus is to see their children or whatever, to say, focus on that. You can talk to your friends, but then focus on what your ultimate goal is. And that's to help your children. So
Absolutely.
that was a great point. And I wrote that down and I will use that. So thank you for the free advice.
My pleasure. There are a few messages that men stereotypically will respond to well, and a few that they'll respond to not well. And if you want to play to the stereotype, you can focus on maintaining men's roles as protectors and providers for their kids, all the way out to talking to somebody who's in a suicidal crisis and talking about the impact for the kids, talking about how kids need their dad, at which point the dad may say, well, the mom thinks I'm a piece of shit and should never be in the kids' lives and I'm just a horrible influence. Say, well, maybe she thinks that, but everything we know about everyone we've ever seen shows that it's better to have both parents, and that if you leave them one way or another, they'll think their dad chose to leave them. Right? So you need to protect your kids by being present in their lives. You can be vulnerable in service of protecting your kids. A friend taught me 2 questions that have carried me through a few years of a lot of uncertainty and a lot of confusion and angst on my part. I think these are great questions to stop and ask oneself at any given moment. 1, how is my child? 2, how is my relationship with my child? How is my child? How is my relationship with my child? And as long as I can answer good and good to both of these, the rest is details. If my child is basically safe, ideally thriving, growing, generally happy, ideally ignorant of whatever conflict is happening, if my child is well, then great. Then there's no immediate emergency. It may feel like an emergency. I'm supposed to see my kid right now. It's Wednesday. It's 3 p.m. It's totally not fair. It's not okay is my child safe? Yeah, he's bouncing around a trampoline park with, friends and no problem. It's just not fair. Okay, good. So it's not fair, but the child is well and safe. Good. Now, how's my relationship with my child? That's a really important question. Are we becoming estranged? Is it actually to that degree? Or are we happy to meet every time we meet and we have a great time together and I feel involved and I know my kids' lives and I have responsibilities in there and I feel good about it and my kid seems well attached to me and all of it? If there's a problem with the connection, that has to be addressed. That's super important. That's top priority. But if there's not a problem with the connection, that there's no emergency. And we can deal with things in a way that's a little bit more considered and more thoughtful, because it's a sense of the emergency that's where a lot of trouble comes from, right? I'll call the police. I'll confront him. I'll confront her. I'll do the. So these 2 questions are, I think, I'm so grateful to my friend for having taught me these questions. And I think they distill so much wisdom. They're such good orienters to the level of urgency in any given situation. Because very often the answer is, it's actually not urgent, like I thought. It's very activating. But it's not that critical. I have time to deal with this. I don't have to solve this in using extreme measures.
I love that.
Yeah, because
I love that.
I think couples are just so mad at each other. I think that's what it is. They're just so emotional and so mad that they're an hour of their time that they were told they were going to get just makes them so mad that they're not going to have that extra hour. But you're right. It's about, what are the kids doing? Are they having fun? Just let them go have fun. But it's so difficult when you're so mad at the other person. So it is good to hear this side, but it's also kind of neutral in a sense too, because this could go either way. A female could ask herself these questions too. And, a female needs a support group. We all need a support group, but knowing those statistics, obviously, men need a little bit, they should go out and get help, because we go right back to the beginning, where if you have a support team, maybe these emotions won't be so high. And maybe it wouldn't be bothersome to you if she has an extra hour with the kids, if you are working on yourself and working on your emotions anyway. So I think that in the end, right out of the gates, like you said, before it goes sideways, get the help.
Connect with support. Yeah. And connect with people who are both well-intentioned and competent to provide support and figure out who are those friends that you want to be getting advice from when you're like extremely upset. Do you call the friend who's even more militant than you, or do you call the friend who's able to kind of talk you down and help you pass the very hard few minutes and hours until you're able to calm down? Yeah, reach out, connect, have a support system ready and happening already. Absolutely. I think that's a first order of business.
Do you think the female in the relationship can find a way to kind of support them as well? I mean, obviously it must be if there's children, but what if there are no children? How do you even, are you just like, I can't stand you, get away from me forever? But obviously you don't like your ex, but you wouldn't want to see them, God forbid, commit suicide, I'm sure,
I'm not sure that it's always our role to support the other person. Sometimes many of us have the instinct to do that, but that creates more kind of entanglement at a time that's supposed to be about disentanglement. And sometimes, and it is about releasing, right? Letting go of the other person and letting them do what they're going to do. I mean, at the extreme end, you have people who threaten suicide if you'll divorce me or something like that, right? That's a whole separate kind of problem and not a good place to be required to be your soon-to-be ex or your ex's support system. These are really, I think, complicated, thorny issues. I'm happy to talk about them a lot more. I think they're super important. But again, first principles as a way to support the other person: avoid character-destroying characterizations, right? You're a jerk. You've always been a jerk. You can't understand. You don't care about the kids. You only care about money. These are not things that are helpful for anybody to say to anybody. And if you're meeting somebody if those statements are meeting somebody who's in a bad place, they can send them into a much worse place. They might believe them. That's really hard because sometimes we're really upset and we want to communicate these things to the other person. But to have some filter between us and the other person is so important. The filter can be another person. The filter can be ChatGPT. At a minimum, you want to be composing your text messages and your emails on a separate program than the one you're using to send. So you just can't press send. You can just write it out and then have time to backspace rather than, have this tiny portion of your brain just move your finger, press send, and destroy the relationship further. So one thing to do to support your ex is to just not make things worse by not making character level accusations.
Makes sense.
The other is to show consideration in a way that's, not condescending or not assuming that you're somehow hurt and need special consideration, but just move toward collaboration. Like, let's discuss. So have a position and show your openness to discussing. Give lots of, this is back to the kind of the first principle of like the do no harm. Give lots of advance notice. If you're going to be doing things that are different than routine or that might be uncomfortable for the other person, right? I'm planning to do this and this in thus and such time. I want to check that, is there anything I can do to make this less uncomfortable, or is there, some, I don't know exactly the language here, right? But if you're aware that something may cause distress or discomfort, at least express that and say, do we need to coordinate any more on this? But having said all this, I do think it's important not to get sucked into a position of I'm your support system. I'm worried for you. I don't want to be with you, but somehow I feel like it's my job to take care of. It's not. Like, this is the whole point of divorce often, is to stop having to carry this other person's life. I think there may be cases where it's totally valid to tell another person or to write to them. So like, I realize you're going through a really hard time. I want to do what I can to not make it any harder than it needs to be. I hope you're getting the support that feels good. Something like that you can acknowledge. But if it becomes, the other person comes back to you and says, well, you're causing the discomfort and you need to change all of this, or, I'm dependent on you. Can we at least talk once a week as if we're still together or, just kind of starting to dissolve the boundaries. You take care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself as well. Again, there's no easy, obvious answer here. In summary, I guess I would say mostly work on do no harm and be cautious about becoming a support system for a person that you're trying to disentangle from.
Yeah. And I love that you're kind of telling everybody, you're letting people off the hook, because I'm sure some people feel very guilty if one person's going through a hard time. They don't want to be the cause of it. But as long as you're not actively making it worse, you're not necessarily the cause, but you can pull away, because you're right. You have to, at some point, you're going to have to live separate lives. So it doesn't make any sense to keep, being their support system when they should find somebody else to be the support system, but certainly not make it worse, which a lot of us can do when we're mad. So
it's so easy. It's so easy. Destroying is so much easier than basically anything else, right?
Right. And that discipline, that takes work to not press send, especially in a world now with text messages. You can destroy just one button and you can destroy a whole relationship. So if only everybody used mediation through their divorce, because we facilitate, because there's always a breakdown in communication with people going through a divorce. So it certainly gets worse through the divorce process. So that's what we're trained to do. So I have to say, I took a lot of notes today.
I don't know.
Did you? You did? Okay. So it was extremely, extremely helpful. I love everything that you said, and I love those key principles. And I think if people can just have that discipline, stick to those principles, focus on their children when children are involved, it would make everything easier, even though we call it the shit tornado when they're going through a divorce. It just feels like it's always spinning and you can't get your head on straight. And so having a focus, I think, might kind of calm that noise a little bit and going back to those key principles. So we thank you for that advice. But how are people going to find you in your work? Where are people going to go? Because we could talk about this all day. If you had about 8 hours on this podcast, we would do it. But how can they find you?
Thank you. Yeah, I love thinking about this stuff and talking about this stuff. So, if you want to spend another 7 hours together, that's fine. For me, the work related to this, it's all on divorcingdads.org. Everything is there. I have a podcast called Divorcing Dads, also, where I interview dads that are going through divorce and kind of accompanying them through that journey. And the idea is just to give people a sense of what's ahead at the micro level sometimes, right? And just get a sense that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, because the first few months are so hard, so hard. And it's so easy to become totally hopeless. And to hear the story of a guy who, went through this, felt exactly as hopeless as you feel. And then, 2 episodes later, it's like 4 months out and he's like, oh, it's starting to stabilize. I feel a little better, blah, blah, blah. So these are the 2 resources I would say. One is divorcingdads.org. The other is just look for a podcast called Divorcing Dads. That's
I love that.
The place.
We're definitely I'm going to for sure tell our clients about that podcast too, because I think that's just a step. Yeah. Even if it could just be a bridge into more, just one step, because it's much easier to turn on a podcast than to actually get on the phone and tell somebody I need help. So maybe if they listen, that's just one step further into putting together a support team.
That was a suggestion that I got from a friend too, because originally when I put together divorcingdads.org, I created some content and then I basically posted like a general invitation if people want to come to support groups or whatnot, crickets. And then a friend said, that's kind of a big ask for men to jump into a support group and start sharing vulnerably about everything going poorly in their life. Why don't you create something that feels more like engagement, opportunity to connect and get to know, but can be done totally non-disclosively, right? Non-vulnerably. And we thought, a podcast is kind of perfect because you get that person in your ear and you kind of develop, it feels like you're developing a relationship because you're getting to know that. It's kind of a one-sided relationship, but you are getting to know the person. And you develop and build some trust and understand that person's approach and see if it fits you. And then from there, you can then choose to join a support group that's going on, maybe meet monthly and talk with other people in the process and so on. Yeah. So that was, it's exactly what you said. That was the goal there.
Yeah, I love it. It's brilliant. Because when we first started our mediation company, we would do online, you can come and listen about divorce and the process of divorce. And inevitably, it would be somebody asking for the recording afterwards. They didn't want to get on live with us. And so the same thing is after a while, you realize, okay, people don't want it's too much too soon, so if you have a way to just talk to people and get them in, it makes more sense. So I'm glad that you have that podcast, but we thank you so much for this. This was actually really amazing.
It was
a lot of good information. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's great to hear a different perspective through this whole process. So we thank you so much.
Great pleasure. Yeah. Thank you for being so welcoming and so open. This is great. I'm in the business of building bridges, and I feel like you've built the other half of it. So thank you.
Awesome. Oh, look at us. Hello. Excuse us. No. So make sure that you try that podcast out, Divorcing Dads, and you can go to divorcingdads.org. And Mandy, you have anything to add before we go?
Thank you. This was unbelievable, and it's great to see the other side. It really is, because then it kind of, when those situations arise and it's like, hold on, there's another person on the other end of my emotions. There's another person who is going through a life that I know nothing about anymore. So let me take a step back and then make it about the kids and not about me. And so that's going to help so many people. So many people. So thank you very much.
Amen. My pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, My Ex Appeal listeners, we will see you next time on My Ex Appeal. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks to our listeners, sponsors, and our lawyers on My Ex Appeal and everything to